right, guys. Hey, appreciate you you being with us for another episode of the Agent Boost Marketing Podcast. Seems like there's a continual deluge of updates and things changing daily, weekly. There's been quite a few things that we haven't been able to talk about on this podcast yet as far as recency of changes, such as a lot of the Part D stuff coming out again that we want to highlight. And ultimately, you know, we want to continue to look at all this stuff from the lens of, you know, how does it affect our partners, our carrier partners? How does it affect our agents and FMO friends? And ultimately, like how do we better help and better serve these beneficiaries, right? So that's kind of
that, and just a barometer of where the industry's moving, because let's be honest, if you look forward a year or 2 or 3 years, it's in a completely different place than it was a few years ago. So
yeah, correct. And so this last couple of weeks, I mean, it's been so busy with, you know, carrier rollouts and eking out pieces of information about service area reductions. And it's kind of like, you know, when you put together a puzzle and you start with 1,000-piece puzzle and then it slowly starts coming into view. That's what's happening right now. We're about maybe halfway through the puzzle piece getting materialized with some big stuff still yet to be determined. But this past week I was actually, you know, Dan was doing double duty. He had Dimitri from GTL in.
Yeah, well, I don't know if this episode's dropping first or GTL.
Yeah, who knows? Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
But
I was entertaining hosting in town, and Dimitri was awesome. And
I was at a carrier rollout,
yeah.
So I went to the Select Health carrier rollout. If you're unfamiliar with Select Health, they're one of our great regional partners here. They're actually based out of Utah. They have plans in Nevada, Colorado, Idaho, Utah.
Yeah, but they're more of a, like, if you're looking at more of a Kaiser model, they're more of an integrated model.
Correct.
I think they, and the one thing that we can talk about is people who have an actual integrated model with systems that they own are faring far better in this current environment than others. And we can talk about that a little bit, but definitely they have the provider side. They own facilities, they own hospitals, they own clinics and doctors, and so that's that Intermountain Healthcare side. And then they actually just purchased SCL Health last year, the year prior, and so that expands over from, you know, Colorado, Kansas, Montana, a bunch of other states in that footprint. So you'll typically find that they're a regional partner, but coincidentally, their insurance product offering overlaps frequently with their provider footprint.
Yeah, and because of that, they're able to do, you know, an above average model of care. They have a 5-star plan that's very good. They have some great policies and processes on the Medicare and ACA side of things.
Correct.
That are very good. And so if you're national and you see that they're growing, they're going into Nevada, they're going into Colorado, et cetera, and you want a contract, we're one of the very few FMOs, and, you know, I'll toot our own horn. I think we're their best FMO partner. So pick up a contract through us because we have the context and the lens of the marketplace being in our backyard, and really understand how to position that product well and where they win. So, yep. You know, it was cool because it was a national rollout. They had some partners from across the country. Some of our friends come in from the industry, and it just happened to be in Park City, which we love Park City. Utah's obviously close for us. It was a commute, easy commute. But what was cool about it was they were actually showing first looks, right? A lot of the carriers
real
have been
ones?
real with the asterisks, right? And
right.
That's what we'll talk about.
But the rebates, yeah.
Is that they actually showed first looks, and some of the carriers are now finally starting to show some of the first looks. And what my takeaway is that, yes, they had to, them in particular, now all the carriers, all the national carriers are going to have a lot of SARs, a lot of service area reductions.
Yep.
And they were able to fare as far as the benefits that are coming out for the fall. They looked better than I anticipated. And so we've been talking about this apocalypse of premiums going up on MAPDs and benefits being reduced, and, you know, Part D, a lot of premiums doubling, tripling, quadrupling, and they were able to weather the storm a little bit better than a lot of other people. And the correlation that I mentioned to you was that, well, they own a lot of network, right?
Right.
So a lot of the carriers that have this vertical integration, they're going to fare far better this AEP than some of these providers that don't own much of any of the networks or doctors or systems.
Well, that and they're 5-star too, and so obviously
Their funding environment.
Yeah, their funding environment is different from somebody that's 3.5, and you start taking a look at like double bonus counties like on stars, and that's why it's such a huge, like that's why 4 is so big. When you hit that threshold, and so because the quality of their plans and they're highly rated, combined with them owning network and facilities, that is what's giving them a pretty good formula to win. Correct.
And the other thing that had happened the past week was the rebates. The carriers, the carriers found out how much the Part D rebates were going to be based on, the NABA, the national average bid amount. Of course, like we've been talking about, they were way higher.
Well, let's back that up a little bit. I think we need to explain. Most of our listeners, brokers, people in the industry, they don't understand how that works. So typically, and granted, go ahead, anybody please correct me, comment, re-educate me. This is a high level just overview or a macro view. I'm going to summarize the process. But normally, in years past, a carrier, they'll have a deadline to file their actual initial plans by June 4th with CMS. So they'll go onto a website, they're going to file their plans, their bids, so to speak, of what their plan offerings are going to be. And then you go through this period of time, like desk review, and it goes through until about mid-August. And basically the actuaries from the carriers who just put together their bids will actually, communicate with CMS and go through their actuaries. And then you want to be as close as you possibly can to the NABA, to the national average bid amount. And then depending on where you land with your bids, you're either over or under, and there's a slight adjustment of your benefits. And that's why, in years past, carriers could come to the market, give you a first look, and, in June or July, they're like, hey, these are our benefits with an asterisk, slightly subject to change, because they would have a few dollars, maybe like $2, $4, $6, per beneficiary that they're off on their bid. And so they can, tweak and make those small adjustments or changes at the end, where, it's...
Or just absorb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we had seen it very common. Let's say a carrier came out and they had really, great plans, and then suddenly at the last minute, the copay on a specialist went from 35 to 25, or, went from 25 to 35, or like very small tweaks that were not that significant that they would do at the very last minute in August based on that. So that's kind of more the historical about how that bid process works. And, what was very different about this year is we've been talking about the apocalypse coming, on the funding environment and how it was working, and these bids started getting submitted. And we'll talk about
the impact of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction
and we'll talk
Act.
about PDP and MA. But now, that's, and then obviously, if you've been following the podcast, there was the whole, lawsuit because of the STARS calculations. And obviously that was a resounding victory for multiple carriers, because once SCAN and Zing and Anthem, once they won the lawsuit, CMS just said, hey, okay, we are going to, systematically, readjust, those stars. And so anyways, they opened up a rebid or refiling window that already happened. And so that allowed carriers to, if they wanted, resubmit their bids, and it kind of drug out that process a little bit longer this year. And now all these plans started coming to market. These carriers started, saying, hey, here's what our plans are going to be looking like. And, like Part D in particular, it was ugly. It was really, really, really ugly.
Well, to that point, some of the carriers had already not officially rolled out their benefits, but they'd floated out what their plans, the amount of plans, what the premiums were going to be, and what those looked like. And it caused a knee-jerk reaction.
I'm going to be able to just say some examples. I had one carrier who had very reasonably priced plans in the $20 to $30 range that said, we're going to have one plan that's $100 a month. We're getting rid of the other ones. And not only is it $100 a month, it's non-commissionable. And we had another carrier who had PDP plans that were less than $1, and they were going to be like, oh, we're going to be sub $30. and with a deductible and with other things. So if you think about that sort of a jump or an increase, they were not small increases. These were massive increases. And so that's what they were communicating to the market. And so there was and of course, this is all based on the funding environment that has been created from CMS and Health and Human Services, right? So, but I will say to their credit, just so people, I try to be pretty neutral and fair and balanced. A lot of this was from the Inflation Reduction Act, and this actually was a bill. It went through Congress. It was legislation. Like, our elected officials voted on this legislation and passed it and made it a law and put it into effect. And so essentially this passed, was it 2022 or 2021 on the Inflation Reduction Act?
2022, I think.
So we knew it was coming down the pipe. It had already been passed, and now it's just, on our doorstep, and here it is, and here's the ramifications of it, right?
Yeah, so, we can talk about, I don't want to talk politics necessarily, and let's kind of talk about, let's put a pin in what those changes to Part D is. I want to get back to like more generic advantage plans and what we're seeing, and then we'll talk about
the Part D,
the Part D and the demonstration and that stuff. But what we were seeing is that we were expecting these advantage plans to have pretty much worse benefits. We were anticipating much higher co-payments, and I'm optimistic that I think whenever all the dust settles and all these changes actually are implemented and the rebates are higher, that the carriers are going to have better benefits than I was initially thinking.
But to your point, that's what I want to explain, is that the carriers were only anticipating, based on everything that's been set forth, is that they were only expecting a few dollars in rebates or extra dollars to put into their plans. And now, just really quickly and suddenly, those amounts tripled, essentially.
The CMS went to the metaphorical couch and looked and found some change and scraped up some extra money in dollars to be able to add to the budgets.
So we're going to talk about the demonstration period here in a sec and everything else, but then suddenly carriers who thought they had a few dollars to work with in providing or adjusting their plans suddenly got a huge influx of cash to be able to put into their plans.
Correct.
And again, just remember, this is a very basic rudimentary explanation for all of you listening.
And the rebate amounts came back, the 30th or the 31st, and then they had
it was on Monday,
one more week. So the carriers basically had 1 week to kind of scramble.
They came back on Monday, the 29th.
Yeah, so they had basically 8 days to kind of scramble and go back the actuarials and tweak and make some adjustments and decide what they wanted to do with those rebate dollars. Keep it, build it back in. And I think a lot of the carriers are going to try to like redeploy those dollars and add back to cuts that they viewed as the most impactful.
My add to this too that I want to just kind of throw out there is there's a lot of carriers who have announced, like, hey, based on this funding environment and everything, we're pulling out. We can't continue to put forth product and be profitable and stick around based on this funding environment. Would they have done that if they would have known that they were going to get this significant of rebates?
Correct. Yeah. Would there have been some plans that they made that were on the bubble that they were on the decision of keeping or not, that they just didn't do it, where if they would have had this information or known that it would have been this significant, they would have kept those plans?
Or what about even some of these SAR areas where it's not a carrier? I mean, we've had carriers just completely announce and say, hey, we're going to stick to commercial. We're going to go back to individual. We're going to do what we do, but we're getting out of the Medicare line of business.
Yes.
Completely. But there's also SAR areas that you kind of go, well, that may have changed their demeanor. So,
yeah, and that's really the big disappointment for me is we've watched the proliferation of advantage plans kind of spread across the country as the funding environment has been appropriate, and they've expanded into rural counties, and there's become ultimately more options for beneficiaries. And with the retreat of a lot of these carriers with the SARs and pulling out of these markets and in entire states and counties, ultimately beneficiaries are going to be left with less options.
Right.
And it's going to take literally years once the funding environment course corrects to redeploy and have those carriers go out and proliferate those plans across these rural areas and these states where they've had to pull out of. And so we're not able to effectively serve as many Medicare beneficiaries.
Yeah, because then people don't even understand the years that it actually takes to get there. I mean, we're talking, you have to meet network adequacy, right? So if they completely pull out of an area, you're now having to spend money yet again in advance, and sometimes 1 to 3 years of paying people to go through network providers, do negotiations, bring them in network, come to terms. Then not only that, filing your plan, going through like your modeling with CMS, getting those approvals. I mean, then you're talking technology from loading it into your doc and your provider lookup. I mean, there's so much behind the scenes that happens. It's not just like, oh yeah, we want to expand our plan here. I mean, even with a life product or med sup, like it's easier. You work with the DOI, you get your product there. But I mean, Medicare Advantage is a whole separate animal.
Well, not only that, but when a carrier pulls out of a market significantly and leaves beneficiaries feel burned,
right?
The doctors, the networks feel burned, the brokers feel burned, and it takes a long time to rebuild that trust and credibility in those markets. And we've seen it in markets with carrier partners that have had significant exits before, and it literally takes years,
almost a decade.
Yeah,
I
was going to say 5 to 8 years at least to rebuild that confidence in that marketplace and go, yeah, well, remember that time when you had our plan before and you liked it and we exited and you had to find something else? Well, we're back, but trust us this time. We're going to be better, and we're not going to do that to you. It does take a long time. So there's a lot of
it's that whole expression that we all innately have of fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, right? And that's how a lot of the consumers and brokers feel.
Yeah, exactly. So the good news ultimately from a lot of this is I think there's going to be less. The plans that are sticking around, I think the benefits are probably not going to change as much. They're
after they've now gone through this saga, and there's higher rebates. Now it looks like there's a lot more stabilization.
Now, overall plans still will not look as sexy as they have the past couple of years, and I do think that because of the lateness and the strategy and kind of the back and forth and so much of the uncertainty, I do think that there's also going to be a lot of big winners and losers in certain markets.
There's going to be a big disparity. I don't think it's going to be as, where the pie got chopped up and it was spread, among multiple carriers. I think it's going to be more decisive in certain areas. The other thing that I was just talking to Mike off camera about that I'm frustrated about in everything. And again, we try to be pretty neutral about, when it comes to political landscape, environment, all that. Unfortunately, we do have to have conversations about administrations or philosophy or paths forward because the strategy changes from administration to administration, but and it impacts our business. But the one thing that's been very frustrating this year for me is that industry takes time to adapt to changes. And since the call letter came out this year with all of these impactful changes along with the Inflation Reduction Act, and both of those kind of going hand in hand, and so much trying to be implemented in 1 year, all the way back from the beginning of, the call letter to, commenter said this, commenter had this concern, commenter worried about the timeline, commenter worried, these are experts and people who are really in the industry who understand it, and they're giving feedback saying we have concerns about these things. And and it was kind of more or less, and again, I'm not trying to be derogatory or negative, it was more of a too bad, so sad, that's what it is. This is how it is. And now that as week after week and month after month progresses from this, and we're getting closer to the actual calendar year and the selling season, and some of these things are coming home to roost or coming to fruition, now it's like turning into an, oh crap, we got to change that. Oh crap, we got to fix that. And it's like, well, industry experts and leaders have been saying that for months now. And again, industry takes time. Like, we've been having to prepare, and, brokers that are good and savvy are out there. My perfect example that I'm going to bring up is the whole employer credible coverage thing right now. Mm-hmm. So it was announced earlier this week, there was a change in methodology on what was considered credible coverage. And, we had a lot of brokers who tuned into that and said, oh boy, this is a concern. There's going to be a lot of people this fall that are on retiree employer group coverage. And with this new methodology, that their coverage isn't going to be credible. They're going to get a late enrollment penalty on Part D. Like, we got to get the word out. So you got brokers going to the marketplace and saying, hey, there's a chance this fall that, your plan may not be credible. We'll follow back up with you, let you know, give you options, trying to really educate. And now, and there's been webinars. I've seen some posted on LinkedIn and other sources about it. And now it just turned into I'm going to snap my finger and go, oh, just kidding. We're not going to do that methodology. If the plan was credible in 2024, it's credible in 2025. Well, you make that broker or whoever that is look like a scammer, look like they're either uneducated, they're ignorant, or they're trying to scam people and force them into buying a drug plan, or, and it's not. That person was well educated, followed it, and now you made them out to be a liar. And that's the one thing that I have really struggled with this year is as the rules of the game are just changing on a week-to-week or a month-to-month basis, it's really hard to adapt as an industry and implement.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, I think it's going to be better for beneficiaries in a lot of ways, but sometimes it sucks to be right about a lot of the stuff that we've been saying. It's like, right. Hey, we're glad that we're coming back from some of this stuff and that we're things aren't going to be as cataclysmic as we were once thinking, but it's like if we'd have just had proper dialogue and discourse and gone through channels and talked about impact, then we wouldn't have been here in the first place. We wouldn't have gone through all that. And I think ultimately that's a couple of good things that I'm hoping come from this chaotic past 12 months is that maybe there's more room at the table with CMS and regulators and, government officials and industry professionals to come together in a productive way and say, what does the market need and why? How do we better serve these beneficiaries? And there's more collaboration versus we're the rule makers, we're daddy, we set the rules and you follow them.
Either that or, hey, let's run through the scenarios. If we go this direction, what are our 3 scenarios of how this is going to play out and impact the market, right? And then just more than anything, I don't want to be portrayed as like, oh yeah, Dan, Agent Boost, those guys are just fear mongers. They've been out there all year touting about all these terrible changes that are coming and how they're worried about. And look, it was fine. And it's like, well, it wasn't going to be fine.
Yeah.
And I've called it the saga throughout the year of just trying to figure out, it's just been such a mess over this past year, and with so much uncertainty, brokers, if they haven't been paying attention, are going to go, things don't seem very bad this year. I stuck my head in the sand and I haven't paid attention to anything, and oh yeah, a couple plan exits and benefits look all right.
That's, however, you mentioned the lower acumen broker that doesn't pay attention that much, and if they just come poke their head around during AEP and they're like, oh, it looks like plans maybe not be quite as good and some plans are leaving.
They're going to ask you for a link for AHIP on September 28th.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the other thing I talked about, maybe there being room at a bigger table in the future for regulators and brokers and TPMOs and industry professionals. I think that's the best path forward, and hopefully that comes of this. But also, I do think that a lot of brokers, a lot of agents have had to pay more attention this year, and I think a lot of them, I'm seeing more people pay attention and care about the process, understand the depth of what goes into building these plans and funding it. And I think you're seeing a dichotomy happen with the agent community and the broker community of the upper half is becoming smarter, more savvier, more sophisticated. They're paying attention and learning things like NABA and how the process works and Part D. And then you're seeing the lower half of agents that don't have a lot of acumen or value. They're just getting washed out of the industry right now, and they're almost kind of just going, this sounds like a lot of chaos and too much to learn. I'm going to go do something else.
But I also think, like, from our perspective, this is just me, like, yeah, I'm on my soapbox, but this is me just kind of touting and saying, though, it does matter who you do business with, whether you're doing business with a local agency, like we hear it all the time, talk to somebody and they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do my Medicare through my local GA Bob because I go to church with him or whatever. Or
he's my PNC agent as well.
I know him and I golf together, so I'm going to run my Medicare through him locally. Well, there is that element of a relationship business, but at the same time, I think agents more this year have realized that the business has always been sophisticated, but it's getting more and more sophisticated and complex. And having like an actual valuable agency, FMO, IMO, whatever you want to call it, that you're aligned with that can actually train, educate, and, give you those resources. Going back to basics. Yeah, there's things out there that, have been under scrutiny from FMOs, like dollars, marketing dollars, other things like that. But at the end of the day, the most valuable thing that we can give agents a lot of time is information, knowledge, how to leverage it, how to use it to your advantage, how to help your clients, how to serve them. And that's where, like, we've seen a big uptick this year too. Like, I mean, personally, as like the business, in really being able to educate good, smart, savvy, valuable brokers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I do think those are, there's some good stuff that can come of all this as far as the reshaping of the industry going forward, for sure. One of the things that I want to talk about, that we're always focused on is how does this impact brokers, right? And so with the increased funding back into Part D particularly, we'd heard from carriers that their Part D plans were going to be going non-commissionable, and that some of the renewals, so prior vested business, were also going to be going non-commissionable.
Right, because they didn't have the money. Like the money was not there.
Correct. And so now, it's like we can hypothesize as to what's going to happen. I think I'd heard rumors amongst the industry that if prior commissions, vested policies were not going to be paid out, there may be some litigation, some lawsuits, because, you've been essentially building a business and saying, hey, we're doing this. We've got these vested policies, and now at the drop of the hat, you're just cutting those off. And I think there was probably some validity to that. And hopefully now that there's a little bit more dollars into that, I think they'll kind of make the decision to pay those renewals. If I had to look in my crystal ball, I'm not convinced that these plans are going to be paying commissions on Part D. I don't know what you think about that.
It's still a hard environment for them to be profitable, but I do think, yes, to your point, everything I've heard is that now renewal payments are back on the table, because if you think about it, we're vendors, right? Like as an FMO, we're a vendor for carriers, and agents are vendor. If you really think about how it all works, and it's no different from if I hire a guy to do a tile floor in my house and I pay him half, which is pretty common. I pay half the money up front, go buy your materials, do whatever. I pay you half at the end of the job when it's done, right? That's normal. Those were the terms. Those are the payment arrangements. That's what we agreed upon. That's how it was. And in our industry, what people aren't understanding is that those payment terms were set and created by carriers and, to essentially incentivize a broker to write business on the front end. They did FMV and changed the comp methodology to incentivize quality and renewals and keep consistency and service the member and provide that ongoing and provide that incentive to provide that good experience and have them on the plan. That's how they created those vendor contracts and payments. So, instead of saying, hey, over the life of a PDP, we're going to pay you year one, and the average is 7 years on the plan, carriers weren't paying a lump sum up front of $800 for a PDP sell. They were spreading it out based on the contract with their vendors over time, right? And so to kind of say, hey, the services were provided by the broker or the agency, the education happened, the consultation or the enrollment occurred, they performed the service, where's the money? It's pretty hard to go back on that.
Well, and when news started proliferating around the industry that PDPs were pretty much universally going to go non-commissionable, you had a big discussion starting to flare up of, well, what do you do with your current members? Are you going to, if you're getting paid on them on renewal, and now all of a sudden, what, you're not getting paid, and what do you have to tell your clients? Like, oh, sorry, too bad, so sad. I'm not getting compensated to help you anymore. And I'm not a volunteer.
Yeah, and I jump into forums and different pages and sites like that, like you do too. And you find, and I will say, the really great brokers, good job, kudos to you out there. I heard some of them posting comments and everything else saying, hey, they've been my clients for years. I'll still help them, just like I'll still spend time and help them with their PDP, even if I'm not getting paid. And I mean, hey, shout out to you brokers out there like that. That's a great mentality to have, where you feel like, hey, I'm going to do the right thing and help these senior citizens, guide them through it and be a resource for them. And it's good karma. It's going to come out, at some point in the future, do a good deed. I'll be rewarded for it. It's a great philosophy to have. Some of them I heard on forums and posting that was their mentality behind it. And then of course the majority, which is understandable, 80% of them are going, yeah, well, screw that. I don't get paid commissions.
I'm not a volunteer. I'm not a social worker.
I'm not pro bono. I got to make money, so I can't help them. So if they call me, I'm telling them too bad.
Well, and our perspective has always been with PDPs, even when they are commissionable, that commission is so low and paltry, and the PDP work of it is actually pretty,
right.
It's a heavy lift there with a lot of clients sometimes in the management and the maintenance, and that's where a lot of the questions and work comes from.
Yeah, well, and if you think about if you're selling somebody a supplement with a PDP too, it's, once you kind of convey to them the supplement and how it works, that's very understandable. And whether you're talking about hopefully, if you're selling med subs, you're talking to them about expecting an increase each year, based on claims data, based on age, depending on if it's, yes, I know, community rated, age attained, age based, depending on the model. But you're hopefully preparing them for price increases each year because that's normal. But anyhow, on the PDP side, though, that's where you do a lot of work for the smaller commission, right? Because that changes every year. They add a deductible. They don't. They change their formulary. You're having to change their PDP maybe on an annual basis or every 2-3 years. The supplement's just there, set it and forget it. You know what I mean? So
yeah. So, I saw the same thing. A lot of brokers and anybody that's been in the insurance industry for a long time has done their fair share of non-commissionable, non-paid service work.
If they're a good agent.
Yeah.
And that is helping somebody apply for LIS.
Correct.
Helping somebody get access to benefit, helping them like spending the time on the phone to get them qualified for SSBCI benefits. That's helping them get their claims data set up online because they struggle with technology, downloading the app on their phone. There's a lot of work that
answering questions and helping people that aren't your clients.
How many times do you talk to somebody that's on a retiree plan, a group retiree plan or something, and you just spend time with them, explain to them how the plan all works, and then you just say, hey, and it's great, and if I'm you, just to stay on the plan. Like, you've got a great thing that other people don't have access to, like, just stay on that retiree
That was probably better conversation a few years ago. That conversation usually doesn't go that way anymore, but same thing. A lot of times you go through and someone's interested, you do a needs analysis, and
there's no commission to be had somewhere, and you're like,
I remember a client, the last time I was actively selling, I spent an hour and 30 minutes on the phone with this agent, and it was a really sophisticated beneficiary. She was on disability and low income, but she was very well educated on the plans and knew her options. And she and I went through every possible scenario for about an hour and a half. And at the end of it, I was like, she felt good about just sticking where she was at. And I was like, yeah, you should probably just stick where you're at. And I'd spent all this time with her, but she was very grateful. And, karmatically, I feel like, you become you're a better agent. It's going to come back to you in some way, shape, or form. But, all of us have those type of conversations as agents and brokers where it's not just about the money, of course. And that's one thing that, I think it's lost a little bit when the broker channel gets vilified all of a suddenly is that, it's all about the money. And you have a lot of these agents who are, I think they function more like social workers or community workers, and they're literally out there being the connection for a lot of these clients to the resources in their community, and they're doing God's work, in my opinion.
Well, and the other can too. Like, I think that we're talking about having more of a voice and a seat at the table with decision makers, right? Regulators, our lawmakers, CMS, and talking about it. And I know there's circumstances that are blown out of proportion. They focus on, this carrier that gave millions of dollars to this organization and influence and swayed, and this organization had bias, and they steered towards that plan, and they're trying to regulate and fix, these outlier kind of situations. But in general, I will say that the agent population too, they really struggle. Like commissions are always under scrutiny, everything else. For every one very successful agent making a lot of money, there's 10 to 20 agents that are struggling. It's just like the real estate market, right? There's 10 to 20 agents that are struggling to even pay bills by trying to do this, right?
Yep.
So,
yeah, absolutely. So, are you going on record and saying you think PDPs are going to be commissionable for 2025 in general, or at least renewals?
I am going on the record. What's today? August
2nd.
August 2nd. As of August 2nd, because things could change next week.
Yeah.
Because we haven't talked about the demonstration period yet and what that looks like, and we assume that the demonstration period is going to go through as I'm anticipating. Yes. As of August 2nd, I am going on record to say, yes, renewals are going to get paid on PDPs, and I am going to say yes, that commissions are going to be there for new sales on PDPs as of August 2nd.
I'll split the difference and say yes on renewals, no on new. I think that's kind of where I'm leaning right now.
I would say, if we want to get granularly, I think 75% of any PDPs that are worth a damn are going to be commissionable.
Okay.
That's
so a mix of both. Yeah, that's probably more accurate, honestly. Yeah. Either way, there's going to be still lots of opportunity. The other part that we wanted to talk about was essentially the reshaping of the Part D, and as CMS basically started hearing back as to some of the impacts and the prices and the premiums that were these carriers came back at with their bids, they did freak out, and I don't think, give them the benefit of the doubt, maybe they didn't really quite realize how that would impact the premiums.
And we're talking about
like
the Inflation Reduction.
Yeah, the Inflation Reduction, the smoothing, and the lion's share of the load on these carriers. And then when they started hearing what the premiums were, and it was looking like premiums were going to double, triple, quadruple, that's a hard sell to the average American to say, oh, hey, this is a win for you all. Look at what we did with this legislation. We're saving you costs on your medications, but your monthly premium that you all have to pay is going to double, triple, or quadruple.
Well, and let's be honest too. Like with that whole Inflation Reduction Act, we've talked about it. The whole intent was there was a smaller percentage of people who were really getting hosed by their drug costs, right? Mm-hmm. There was a small percentage of people who were hitting the gap every year, who were paying exorbitant amounts. They've already done a lot of legislation for diabetes, but there's all these other meds. The other thing we haven't really talked about is all the GLP-1s and Ozempic and how much that's, becoming a cost to the system now and how expensive it is. And, candidly, you have all these growing costs and the cap at 2,000, and so they're doing these things that are great, and they're great for those people that it helps, but then that benefits the 10 to 15 to 20% of the population, and then it very negatively impacts the other 80%, right? And they're paying for it.
Well, correct. And in this whole healthcare ecosystem and Medicare and Medicaid, the entities that I feel the least sorry for and I cry zero tears for are the pharmaceutical companies, right?
You went there because that's my critical. The thing that I'm critical about with the whole demonstration period that I think we're going to talk about, what kind of happened is CMS introduced this new thing, and they said, hey, we're going to do now that they saw what the drug plans were going to look like, they said, let's do a demonstration period over the next 2 weeks, and if we were to give you these dollars, how much was it, $155 per? Like
176, right?
Yeah, I'm quoting off of memory. I didn't prep and study for this podcast, but it was like $155, $176 and per member on the drug plans. So, hey, carriers, if we were to give you this money, demonstrate to us what would your plans look like.
The amount, the subsidy, right?
Yeah.
Like, so essentially the demonstration becomes
it's a subsidy. So
program.
Really what happened is CMS said, hey, we're going to just actually, you talked about finding change in the couch. They just said, we're just going to subsidize.
They reached in there and found $100 bills instead of change.
I know. I wish they found like a stacks of money sitting under there, which I want, because I don't know if the math was right. Somebody online did the math on it, but it's going to be billions of dollars with a B. So suddenly they said, we are going to, when they say we, I mean, remember, government doesn't make money. Government spends money. So when they say we are going to subsidize, that means that the taxpayers are going to subsidize.
The Medicare fund, the taxpayer, and the rough math on it was about $36 billion.
Yes. Okay. So then they
said, for 1 year.
We're going to now, taxpayers, we're going to subsidize drug plans to get them more in line. So give us a demonstration period. Come back to us and show us what your plans are going to look like now if we give you this money. Okay, so that's what this demonstration period, this exercise that's going on right now, is they're kind of doing this baby refiling of their plans again to show what they'll look like with these new subsidies. Now, remember, now this demonstration period is only going to be approved or a subsidy for 1 year for 2025. So, I look at that and go, and the reason I'm critical going back to pharmacy is like, but who's paying for that? Then that just means that the taxpayer's paying for it suddenly. And we're completely letting off the hook, and that's great now for the consumers and the seniors that are getting, they're not going to get hit with these huge with these huge
premiums,
increases. Yep. But like the pharmaceutical companies just got to keep doing what they do
and get theirs. Yep.
Yeah, and get theirs. And they didn't have to give any concessions in this, and that's why I'm, critical of it. And then I also wonder and go, well, now is this a new element to where every year on a year-to-year basis with the Inflation Reduction Act just being there and having passed and being in legislation, do we now have to wonder every year, like, is there going to be a subsidy for Part Ds continually and always, or never, or is it going to go away after 2025? And that's now created a whole nother albatross for people to figure out.
Correct. And, that's where, we try not to get into political stuff, but we know what's happening this year, and you just go, what's the gamification of this? Like, we've kicked the can down the road. All we did is kick it down the road one more year, where we have that doesn't solve the situation. That doesn't solve the effects that the Inflation Reduction Act is going to have on Part D going forward. Right. So all we've done is essentially out of nowhere said, yeah, we're going to subsidize this to the rough amount of $36 billion. And I don't know if anybody else cares or pays attention to our national deficits and the way that our country and government spends money, but our government doesn't have money. That's taxpayer dollars. That's, we can't just keep conjuring and tens of billions of dollars out of the air
and if you print more of it, then it makes your dollars you have less valuable, and that's how your purchasing power goes down, and it's a hidden tax.
Yep.
And so again, it's like it's not good to do that, and this is coming from me.
But that money goes somewhere. It ultimately trickles down, and it lands in the pockets of somebody.
Right.
And who is it?
So that's just the challenge that we have with all this too. Is like I said, I'm worried about the now and this 2025 year, because I don't want destabilization of our PDP plans. I feel really bad for seniors on a fixed income with all the inflation and everything else happening, and we don't want to hit them, and I am worried about now, but I'm also just concerned and go, that's not better though. It's not better to suddenly have to subsidize billions of dollars and now create this new environment that on a year-to-year basis, either next year we're just going to rip off the Band-Aid and say, hey, sorry, that was a one-time thing where we subsidized that demonstration period to solve that problem. Now we're not doing that anymore. Now we're going to give you the business, and now you got to get hit with reality and huge steep increases next year. Why does that matter? We're just kicking the can down the road. Or again, we're now going to have to just continually subsidize that from here on and forever.
Yeah, the precedent will have been set, and then it'll essentially be a subsidy that's going to happen that's going to be extremely costly for the rest of time. And ultimately, I think pharmaceutical companies benefit, drug manufacturers benefit.
Yeah.
And I don't know how great that is for anybody going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is, just as a note, as we're talking about that too, PBMs have been drug in front of Congress lately too. And just another little side note of our podcast, and I think PBMs have been under scrutiny for offshoring some of, because there's rebate, that's a whole other thing we could talk about on an episode, just FYI. But since we were talking about pharmaceutical companies, we can't let PBMs off the hook either. Basically, kind of like MLRs, the rebate should be passing down to consumers. And so it's been very apparent that a lot of the big PBMs have a strategy to create offshore entities and flood like a lot of their rebate dollars through these offshore entities to make it look like they're passing, their rebates on to consumers, but they're not. So that's another thing going on. I'm sure you can search it up, look at more about that going on as well.
Yeah, we could talk about that. And then the other episode that we need to do early next week is, talk about ACA stuff, where all the changes with the AOR changes and CMS shutting down.
Which I will say is actually really good.
Yeah.
I am actually really happy about it. So like I said, as
it's clunky, but it's good.
It is.
Yeah.
Look, we want to be fair, and like everything, I'm going to say, hey, thank you, CMS. Thank you for doing that. Yeah, your delivery sucked, but I'm glad you made the change. When I talk about the delivery, it was like a random Friday 2 weeks ago when they just flipped the switch and just didn't kind of tell the market, and we kind of scrambled. But They've made a lot of positive changes. I don't want to go into it too much because I don't want to steal our thunder for another episode, but very actual positive changes to the ACA and the marketplace side within the last 2 weeks. So just as CMS giveth and CMS taketh away, we got some really good positive
Shout out
things.
the wins because we think it's a positive change for that marketplace. One that we knew was going to happen, but it's just happening a little bit earlier than we even anticipated, So let's kind of sum up. As of when we filmed this podcast, August 2nd, it's looking like, yes, there are going to be a massive amount of plan exits or service area reductions. A lot. Like, I'm just adding them up in my mind. We have a list that we're building called it's a tracker. We can't talk specifically about them on this podcast because it's not compliant. And I'll just also put a reminder out there because I'm seeing a lot of agents posting stuff out there. LinkedIn and things like that are not gate kept to only agents, so you are in violation. And I will say I've had one carrier say that they're going to start terming people because the cat got let out of the bag, so to say, quite a bit early on one of these exits, and it's caused a lot of consternation, and these carriers will take action.
Two things I will, just to remind people of that, of compliance. I'm a sales guy, but hey, we all have to live with compliance in that it's true. If you have information about anything 2025, whether it's benefit information or whether a plan's going to be there or not be there. So that includes expansions as well as service area reductions. That's all information for 2025. So to take that information to the public, you can't do until October 1st. I've had agents that I've worked with that are affiliated that have been terminated because they've even gone to doctors or clinics to say, hey, like this plan's going to be exiting. I want to work with you ahead of time, summer months like now where they're trying to get ahead of things, and you can't do that. That's not compliant. So just remember that when we have information like first look stuff, you have to have that hidden behind where there's a login or you provide an NPN or whatever to access the information. So that's just a good friendly reminder out there to everybody.
Correct.
About we don't want, whether you're one of our agents or not, we just don't like seeing brokers who don't have, malicious intentions. They're just ignorant and they get in trouble. So be careful.
Yeah. And we know carriers are out there looking for it, and there's big dollars and there's big ramifications and a lot of customers that could be impacted. And so don't be the one that causes those big issues. However, if you are an agent and you're interested, we have a tracker that we've been building. We're very aware specifically to the tune of how many, enrollees are affected in a lot of these areas, where the carriers are exiting, what states they are.
County level. Yeah.
And if you're not getting that type of information for strategy and planning for AEP from your FMO, come on over. That's the kind of stuff, the valuable information that we're aggregating and disseminating and preparing our agents for, because this annual enrollment is going to be the most impactful we've seen.
The other thing I'll add to adding into that last element, remember, guys, be smart. There's rules out there in place. Follow the rules, but also use the rules to your advantage, right? And in a compliant way, meaning that if you are one of these brokers and you know that there's a plan exit happening this fall, and you know it, and you've got 700 members that you're going to need to go and service, do not be going to your consumer right now and being like, hey, buddy, I've known you for 4 years. Just FYI, I'm getting you an advance notice. Your plan's not going to be here, and let's move you to something else now so I can get my service or work done now and check the box. Don't do that. What you can absolutely do is if you had valid election codes, like any DST, codes, any 5-star plans, members who are LIS or dual, if it's a valid, good election code, you certainly can go talk to your clients at any point in the year, have a conversation, do a review with them, move them to a plan. You cannot mention anything about their plan going away, anything else like that. So again, that's just like a friendly reminder about, we always try to tell people there's a way to do it the right way. Don't do it the wrong way. Don't get sideways on it.
Correct. So to that point, there's going to be also some big winners and losers this year with who is sticking around. There's going to be some disparity in the market. You're probably going to have to play some defense on your book of business regardless. And there's also going to be a lot of opportunity to move some of these policies around to maybe carriers who are going to be able to better service them for 2025. So lots of opportunity coming there. As of right now, no one's really sure about Part D, if they're going to be commissionable, if they're not. I'm sure we'll probably have some clarification on that in the next 2 months. The next 2 weeks. The next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that. And then
we're starting to get
first looks. First looks.
Even from carriers too. Agents have been asking me to, and I'll just be happy to share like publicly, about, hey, so the lawsuits that were happening with the injunction and, comp, they're basically like, is everything just going back to how it was? For the most part, yes. Like in general, carriers are now starting to come out and retract on not paying HRAs or VBEs for the most part. Now they're starting to send out communications saying, our position is that we are going to pay for 2025 HRAs or VBEs. And what they're doing more specifically too is saying it's only going to be for DSNP, not for traditional. And so they're kind of clarifying what they're paying VBEs or HRAs for. That's coming back on the table. We've already talked too about the $100 for agents and the $50 renewal. That got wiped away with the injunction, so that's off the table. So brokers really only get like a 2%, 2.4%, pay increase on the FMV for next year.
But the marketing incentives and things, they're back on.
Yep.
I know a carrier that's doing the $100. If you've sold 5, they do $100
Yep.
per enrollment marketing.
That's
so
all.
$500, that's more than what you were getting.
I will say though, and the carriers too, it would be nice to have something better than an IOU out there on how
Show us the money.
How distributors are getting paid, because now everything's turned back to carriers can pay FMOs. Carriers can pay agent FMV. They can, but a lot of the carriers, just because I've had agencies asking me, we still don't have like communication clearly from carriers saying, yeah, you know what, you're at this contractual level as a vendor. We're paying you these dollar amounts on a per sale basis, or how we're going to pay you front looking, rear looking. It's kind of all been like, yeah, things are back to normal, but we'll let you know here in a few weeks what that looks like. And co-op we can do, but we don't know and what that looks like. So that's still all on a very carrier to carrier level, and I guess more their appetite for growth and what they're wanting to do. So I think we're still going to see some disparities there from a strategy perspective on the carriers. And that's the last thing that I'll probably add.
Yeah, and so we know that the final baked cakes have to be due for plans on the 7th, right? August 7th. And so after that, we'll know exactly what benefits are. You're going to start seeing first looks from your local broker managers coming out.
End of August.
Yep. And then along with that will be a lot of the clarifications on here's where we want to grow. Here's where we can be profitable. Here's some co-op dollars if you're eligible type.
But I'm just telling brokers in general, like our agents, other agents too, like if you're with another FMO, I don't think people are trying to be dodgy, at all. But I just think that, in years past, we as an industry and a supply chain could have easily gone to an agent or an agency and been like, hey, what's your business plan? What are you going to do? Here's how we can support you. Here's like dollars for it. Here's whatever. That was all a lot more transparent and easier to do. And things are still murky right now. And to Mike's point, we're not going to get clarity still for about another couple of weeks. And so if you're one of those people listening and they're like, you're frustrated with your FMO or agency, I would say give them the benefit of the doubt, because we're a step or two down the supply chain. And like I said, it's still a little bit murky on how that's all going to shake out. And it will shake out, I think. And that's one of my biggest things that I think I'll just add before we wrap is, hopefully everybody knows this about me. I've been pretty optimistic. It's more, I got to educate myself as a leader and know what's happening and still continue to be like just steadfast and foot on the gas. And that's what we've been. And so I think even with all this uncertainty, there was never a question about were we going to come out of this or what was it going to look like. We were always going to fare fine. And that's what I'm telling the brokers too. But you just have to kind of wait for it. We've just been sitting on pins and needles, and it is going to be fine, and it is going to work itself out. And by September 1st, we will have more insight and clarity for what the enrollment season looks like.
Yeah, if I was you, I would preparing is going to be more important this year than ever before for AEP. If you don't have your strategy, I would kind of have a plan based on like almost like a decision tree where, you know, if this happens, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to A, B, and C and have, you know, you never usually hear have some contingency plans or have a plan A, B, and C. It's usually like you got one plan, burn the boats, execute on it, you know, but it's like this year you might want to have a little bit of kind of like, I would say options. If this kind of solidifies like this, I'm going to do this. If this pans out like this is what I'm going to go doing, and have a couple of different options that you can solidify and execute as things come into clarity over the next 30 days.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And since I'm a sports guy and it's already becoming football season, there's going to be some of those third read looks that are going to get some action this year. So,
yeah, there's going to be a little scramble plays, a little breakdown of coverage and scrambling out and making some stuff happen for sure.
Yep, there is.
Yep, there's our sports analogies. Yeah. That's a good place to wrap.
Yeah, you should throw an image up there or something, Matt. Come on, it's football season.
Let's do the butt fumble or something like that. Pull us an image of the famous butt. You're a New York guy.
Mark
Tush push, the butt fumble, something good, some scramble.
All right. Well, hey, I think that's enough for this week. We've got to wrap. All of our salespeople with ADD are probably done.
Yep.
So
thanks, guys.
Agent Boost.